Welcome, scholars. This week we're talking about Chapter 4, Biodiversity and Evolution. Kind of a good kind of filler or add-on to last week's chapter, which was Chapter 3 on ecology. Both these things tie together quite nicely with the ecology sections. That's what we're following them up with after Chapter 3. The first thing we'll look at is the core case study, which is on the American alligator. When I first moved to North Carolina, this was probably one of the coolest animals I've ever seen. We don't have them in Michigan, obviously, and I was pretty excited to see that we have those in North Carolina, and so it's a pretty cool animal to talk about. The reason why we're discussing it within Chapter 4 today is how that organism, number one, has evolved over hundreds of thousands of years, as well as the fact that it's been able to adapt and survive with the human condition. It is the largest reptile in North America, which you guys investigated during your core case study. Circle up today. In the 1930s, hunters and poachers were very active in killing the American alligator, mostly for its hide because it made great leather, great belts, great coats, all sorts of good things as far as fashion and apparel goes. Really the importance, though, we didn't realize the importance of the American alligator until later, and it is a keystone species, which means a lot of other organisms benefit from it being in the ecosystem. I know it's a top predator, and you wouldn't think other organisms even like that in the ecosystem, but really without those gators, and the holes they dig as they're building their nesting mounds allows for ecosystems to actually be able to happen. So the more holes they dig, the more water congregates, and the more ecosystem or aquatic ecosystem there are for other species like fish and turtles and frogs and everything else. In 1967, they were put on the endangered species list due to the fact that they were overhunted and annihilated in a lot of their range. Because they were put on the endangered species list, they are kind of a success story where they within 10 years came back very, very strong with numbers-wise as far as population size, and they actually moved down to the threatened species list and eventually off it altogether. If you go down to the Everglades in Florida, which I've got a chance to do and been on an airboat ride, really, really awesome sight to see. There's tons of alligators down there. Even if as you drive through the Everglades, you'll see them just basking on the side of the road because they are ectotherms trying to absorb that heat and gain energy for themselves as far as the metabolism goes. But here's an image of the American alligator. All right, so the first section we're going to cover is why is biodiversity even important? What is it? Why is it important? We're also going to talk about the different types of biodiversity. I mean, we know biodiversity means diversity of life, because bio means life, diversity means many, so many different types of life. But there is some specifics to that, and there's some different categories of biodiversity that we're going to discuss here. So biodiversity is a crucial part of the book as well. Remember, we talk about the 4 core sustainable principles, and biodiversity is definitely one of those. In sustaining Earth's natural capital. It is a vital renewable resource. As long as populations stay intact and population size of different organisms are growing and well, then we have lots of different types of genetics and different organisms on the planet that give us that renewable energy, or renewable resource, I should say. So there are different types of diversity. There's 3 different types. The major types are species diversity, ecosystem diversity, as well as functional diversity. We're going to throw in one more type when we add on to this next slide. So first of all, we'll start with species diversity. You're probably most familiar with. That's just the different number and abundance of species present in the different amount of ecosystems and communities that we have on the planet, whether it's aquatic or terrestrial. And then we're going to look at ecological diversity, which is just a variety of different ecosystems, looking at freshwater ecosystems, saltwater, brackish water, rainforest, tundras, all these different deserts, all these different types of ecosystems and biomes make up ecological diversity. Functional diversity is actually different processes, the energy flow we talked about last chapter in Chapter 3, the matter recycling, which we talked about last in Chapter 3 too, and just how all those things kind of play a vital role in the functionality and the function of these different processes. And the new one that we're going to talk about is genetic diversity, because that's going to get thrown into the mix in Chapter 4 here. And that's just the different variety of looking organisms, looking organisms within the same species. So the image here, right here, is the snails. They have obviously different shells of snails. They might better fit their environment because of looking at just the way they different look. They blend in the environment. They have good camouflage. Some of them might be better camouflage to suit the soil that they live in or the habitat they live in. So that different genetics allows that species a better opportunity to live on and thrive within whatever ecosystem that they are inhabiting. All right. The second section that we're going to talk about is where do species actually come from? And we were talking about this in class today, looking at how do you create new species through speciation? And so we're going to look at the scientific theory of evolution, how it explains how life on Earth changes over time, and also changes because of genes and genetics. We'll look at how populations evolve when genes mutate and give some examples of that as well. So, biological evolution by natural selection explains how life changes over time. Our biggest players in this section are Charles Darwin, which you guys hopefully remember back in the day from biology. Biological evolution is a process where Earth's life changes over time because of the genetics. It's always based on the genetics. Now, back in the day, Charles Darwin had no idea about genetics, but he knew that things were changing over time, so he gave this insight to natural selection, as well as Alfred Russel Wallace. Again, what did these two guys observe? Lots of different things. I'd like for you to read over this stuff in the section of the second section, 4.2, and take a look at what the contributions are of Charles Darwin. Obviously, he came up with survival of the fittest, but many other kind of natural selection laws or theories that he came up with, as well as Alfred Wallace. There's a tree of life. It's a phylogenetic tree, which you guys hopefully remember from biology, on the main kingdoms of the organisms on page 81, which we're going to take a look at next. So if you're following along with your CD, definitely take a look at this section. So 6 major kingdoms of species as a result of natural selection will be the earliest ones that formed. This kind of shows it millions of years ago are the prokaryotes, the eubacteria, the archaeabacteria. Eventually protists came along. They were our first kind of animal-like, fungal-like, and plant-like protists. And then plants kind of evolved from that, and funguses and animals as well, or fungi and animals as well. So fossils, looking at fossil records, that's one of our major key components is how we actually, really learn about evolution and kind of proved it over time. Fossil evidence is physical evidence of ancient organisms, revealing what their internal structures look like. Fossil records can be incomplete, obviously, because a lot of changes happen at the Earth. Things just didn't die, and plus there's lots of things in the bodies of organisms that really doesn't fossilize well. So a lot of times fossil records can be incomplete because of a number of different reasons, but at least it gives us a little bit of a glimpse as to what happened in the past. This is just a look at one of the types of fossilized skeletons. This is of a herbivore that lived during the Cenozoic era. You guys will be responsible for knowing the different eras. We haven't talked about that yet, but you are responsible to know for that for the AP exam. But we're not going to talk about that right now. But this is just one organism and a view of a fossil. All right, so genetic makeup of a population can change. Populations evolve by becoming genetically different. Well, what kind of evolution is this? Well, if we're becoming genetically different, then it would be divergent evolution. If we are kind of dissimilar and then we're kind of becoming more similar as far as evolution goes, it's called convergent evolution. It's kind of like convening, coming together, diverging, kind of leaving or going apart. This should be a review for you based on your biology lessons back in the day. Genetic variations, your first step in biological evolution. You have to have mutations or some sort of genetic variation to allow these organisms to actually look different, serve different roles, and kind of change shape or look even. Occurs through mutations in reproductive cells. So all genetic variation really boils down to mutations. Accidental. Now, not all mutations are bad. They're all not good either, like an X-Men. But sometimes the right mutation is perfect for that exact time in the ecosystem or whatever is happening, the changes that are occurring, which allows that species to then basically evolve to what they are based on the biological or the environmental happenings of the time. So natural selection acts on individuals. So the second step is in biological evolution are the adaptations. So based on the genes that the organism has, they either are going to adapt to the situation, the changes that are happening in the environment, or they will not. So they have adaptations may lead to the differential reproduction, which means some organisms reproduce better because they're more fit for the given situation. Others might die off. So there's also genetic resistance, like bacteria, which is kind of breeds us the fear of hand sanitizers. A lot of people say, they look at hand sanitizer, that can be a dangerous thing because it says 99.9% it kills bacteria. But, there's billions of bacteria all over your body, all over the desk, all over everything else. So that 0.01%, that doesn't cover it's still like millions of bacteria, and those bacteria could become more resistant to the different alcohols or different whatever antibiotics that we're using in order to kill those. So that is kind of the danger there. But those organisms that do survive, that interaction or that exposure to to hand sanitizers will then live on, reproduce more, and then that would kind of lead to more offspring being more resistant to whatever antibiotics or hand sanitizers. So when the environment changes, which is kind of the other than the genetic change or the mutations, the driving force comes from environmental condition changing. When that change does come in the environment, organisms have to do